can. I don't see how I can, I've got my screen in front of me, but not in front of you. I had it earlier, but now, here we go. Okay, here we go. Can you all see that? Fiscal sustainability? Are we on the same page?
Yep.
There we go. Yeah.
Yeah, we see it. Yeah.
Okay, great. The intro to this was just sort of a quick recap of where we've been and sort of where we're headed in terms of the finances of the town. It's very oversimplified, but it's at least something to give us a little bit of a perspective. I would encourage you to, if you want to make a comment, just raise your hand, unmute yourself and do that. We have small enough group, but I think we can carry on a reasonable conversation and be happy to do that. We are recording this, as I think you already know. What we'll try to see if there are some themes that begin to emerge from each of the breakout groups as to what's on people's minds. So these is just as to recall, the 5 goals that were talked about were balancing revenue and costs so that we could keep taxes under some reasonable sense of control, capitalize on volunteer and the philanthropic culture of the town. You know, we have the Friends of the Council on Aging, we have the Friends of the Library, we have the Cultural Foundation, Conservation Foundation, we have the School Education Foundation, a lot of philanthropic and support from other sources other than the town and other than taxes. And we're sort of in the early stages of doing a lot of long-range facility planning with taking care of all the deferred maintenance activities that are now catching up with us. And we still are looking every day at places like the Highland Building and wondering what to do with town-owned properties that are underutilized. And then we have a lot of agricultural businesses and other businesses that certainly could be supported in a better way to help the owners of those businesses perhaps generate more revenue and more taxes. So just sort of where we've been the last 9 years, we've grown to a $30 million budget. We've gone from an average tax bill of under $12,000 to over $15,000. It's almost 30% in 10 years. And at a nominally speaking, you know, at a $30 million budget, which is basically where we are, and a $15,000 average tax bill, and 80% of the town budget being salaries and benefits, and those are growing at sort of a rate that's very difficult to control because a lot of our salaries are baked into our future in terms of contracts that folks have. And so, you know, what nominally we'd think to be a 2% COLA increase, when you take all the other step functions and would take longevity bonuses, and when you take what's baked into our contractual obligations, 2% COLA is really more like a 2.5 or 3% COLA. So when you think that 80% of a $3 million budget is that kind of stuff, is 24 million, and 2.5% of 24 million equates to about another $600,000 in increases. And then you look at the growth side of our equation, where we have, on average, we've added 10 houses a year for the last over 10 years. And each new house might generate $20,000 in new taxes. So 10 new houses will bring in $200,000 in new revenues. And a 2% COLA will take, you know, $400,000 or $500,000 or $600,000 when you take the benefits and include it in there in new spending. So there's no question that we're going to continue to see increased pressure on taxes, and being able to control the rate of increase is going to be a major problem for the town. So just that as a kind of as a background, and I don't want to belabor it, but these are the ways those goals have been stated in terms of the master plan. And I think the first one pretty much is almost a definition of fiscal sustainability, which balances the revenue and the spending so that our taxes remain, as a percentage of what we make of our incomes, that our taxes aren't continuing to increase as a percentage of what we make. That's particularly important for seniors who may not see as great an increase year to year as people that are in the workforce are able to do. So anyway, I'll shut up and let you do the talking, ask the questions. David?
Yeah, thank you. So let me make it, thank you for that. And let me make a few remarks. I think most of you know me, but I was 9 years on finance committee and 6 years on school board, and now I'm a selectman. So I kind of got that, right, as far as the financial model. And Carrie's correct. But if you think about 3% over 10 years, 30% over 10 years, that's not so bad. I mean, that's 3% a year, which is kind of, the statute is written, and most of you know this as well, that increases within the levy limit go up 2.5% a year. If you listen to Jim Dar at town meeting, you know that we are under the levy limit, so we could grow more, but pretty much hewed to that 2 to 3% level. So it's not exorbitant. And I realize that seniors on fixed income may not have as much flexibility, but generally speaking, if you look at the cost of everything over that time, we're probably pretty much in line. Carrie's also 100% correct that most of our cost is in personnel, and that a lot of our personnel are in collective bargaining agreements. And also those agreements have pretty much kept to that same kind of level when one calculates COLAs, steps, and lanes. So we're not really out of whack as far as that goes. I think the bigger issue to me is, besides that, what do we spend our money on and how does that affect it? And I think that jumping down to the third bullet, the public facilities and so forth, I will say right out, I'm somewhat disappointed that the master plan is not laying out a vision for what kind of infrastructure. We're kind of doing this group grope and everybody's saying they like sustainability and they like, the schools, and okay, yeah, we know all that. I'm not sure that we needed a big survey to tell us that. Well, what's really important is to figure out what are the growth needs for the town over the next, 10 or 20 years that will require major investment. And obviously physical plant, new buildings, repairing old buildings, that's a key part. And if we're going to offset that with some reductions, I think we have to face the economics. And either Carrie or maybe it was John Ballantyne, I can't remember, wrote a note the other day, regionalization of some things that are not core to us that maybe could be more cost effectively, subbed out to a larger town. Because we do, in this whole thing, we suffer from diseconomies of scale. We're so small. For example, a school, we have a superintendent that manages a school of 600 people. Superintendent makes, high six-figure salary, but so does a superintendent that, manages 20 schools. So if we're going to be a separate district with a superintendent, and I'm not implying we shouldn't be, but that's a diseconomy of scale. Same with a police chief, et cetera. So I would like to, my view is that I totally agree with Carrie that, the fixed costs are kind of fixed, really hard to undo if you're going to be an independently functioning town. And we're not bad. We've controlled it pretty well. But if we really want to offset what we're going to have to make investments in with true operational reductions, we're going to need to make hard trades on things that we really don't need to make town unique, that we could possibly buy from other towns or so forth. So at that point, I'll relinquish the balance of my time.
No, that's very good. Additional context for all of this, because as you're right, I think you point out correctly, we're not in really bad shape, but we are small, and we're not able to do some things as easily as some of the other towns around us can do. Rick, did you have a comment?
Sure. I came here. I'm pleased to hear some of these comments. And Carrie, I really appreciated your comment in the mosquito, I don't know, a month or so ago, just exploring the opportunities, or at least the necessity to perhaps partner with nearby towns for some of the services as an option that could be explored by Carlisle. Because as you both indicated, our revenue base is relatively fixed. I mean, the 2 to 3% growth on what's already a fairly high tax burden for our town does translate to quite a bit of money over even annualized over a 10-year period. And there was the analysis, and I forget who presented it. Maybe it was Valentine's column in the Mosquito or FinCom, but looking at the cost of some of these, proposed new facilities that people are jumping on the bandwagon for. A new public safety building would result in about a $3,000 per household increase, the way it was described in the article. That's, I would suggest is probably dead on arrival once it actually gets to the public to decide whether they would support that. So, I do think it's essential for the master planning process to really be looking at what are the needs of the town, the priorities, but then what are the alternatives for satisfying those needs, rather than just building our own facilities and going it alone. But what kind of economies of scale could be gained by partnering with Concord, Billerica, Chelmsford, Westford, Bedford, for various things. And I know the public safety building will very quickly become a sensitive topic and contentious topic, but I think that's something that should be built into the master planning process rather than having a separate group deciding independently. We want to pursue this, the Highland building idea, again, happening outside of the master planning process, which just doesn't make sense to me. It seems like the master planning process ought to be leading the conversation around what the needs are, rather than having these parallel conversations going on at the same time.
Yeah, I think hopefully the master plan will help guide those discussions and guide the priorities. Timing is of the essence here. We won't have the master plan draft probably done by until the end of the year, and while everything's moving ahead, so that's another sort of concern, I think, that we need to deal with.
Absolutely, and then the other, I think, big infrastructure project that's come up in various conversations is the idea of a community center, which would probably have a similar price tag to what some are proposing for a public safety building, and there's no way that Carlisle can even consider doing those two major projects on any reasonable timeline, but those would need to be prioritized, and again, really think about which if either could be done and which could be done collaboratively with nearby towns. I just worry that we're going to get ahead of ourselves and having various groups chasing it down a pet project, without some integrated prioritization.
Well, one thing that surprised me is that in looking at the average or median household income in Carlisle relative to other Tony suburbs in the Boston suburbs, we are right at the top of the list in terms of income levels here. And, that's a relatively new phenomenon, I think, over the last maybe 4 years. It's become more of that. I know I'd like to hear more of what you think about the tax situation. My grandmother always used to say when when I talk about taxes, she would say, "Are you bragging or complaining?" You know,
Yeah,
I kind of, I think there are a lot of folks that are pretty well impervious to a 30% increase in taxes over a 10-year period. I think that's just a fact.
that may be the case. There are also, I think, the median household income has probably grown pretty dramatically in recent years, but at the cost of who can live in the town. We've heard that our teachers, our firefighters, our town services folks, there's no way they can even consider living in town. And that is that's in some ways a trade-off that I think impacts the character of the town, and in ways that I think we want to be mindful of. And something that did, that we're not recognizing is what had been, previously, you could deduct the state and local taxes unlimited from your income taxes. That with the cap of $10,000 that recently was put in place by the recent tax bill, that changed the equation a bit for folks as well, and people are, I think, mindful of that. So I think a 3% growth annual, or 2.5% growth annually over time does add up to be quite a price tag for folks that are sort of on the lower end of that median income for the town.
Yeah.
And I think we just want to be sensitive to that.
Yeah. Yes, I see a hand raised. Unmute, please.
Talking to me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I'm having trouble with the video, so I just want to, I'm sorry to change the topic, but I'm not sure how far we were going with that anyway. I want to talk about the last two, and part of this has to do with years and years and years ago. It's been a long time, but I was chair of the finance committee long ago, and I've also, covered the finance committee as a reporter for years. And one of my pet peeves is that people seem to, every time somebody wants to spend some more money, they say, well, why can't we raise the taxes on local businesses? And I think I see a little bit of that fallacy creeping in here, and I'm not quite sure in what way to point it out that it is a fallacy. My recollection is that there is a limit under state law for what the percentage has to be that business value is to overall property valuation in the town before we can assess a different tax rate on commercial property. And my memory is it was something like 1 or 2%. And at the time that I was involved in setting the tax rate business, I think that we had something like 0.2 of 1% maximum. I don't know if I don't think that could have changed, because I don't think there are that many other businesses in town. And so I just wanted to point out that, maybe somebody could say in a report, this is not actually a feasible way, unless we were to decide in some other direction that we were going to establish a business zone and try to attract more businesses to it. I just don't think that farms and ferns and the insurance company, and maybe we might get a bank, I just don't think they're going to get us to that 1%. And so it's not really going to help us buy ourselves a police station or a community center. And
that's never come up in any of our conversation, Nancy. I think that's something we need to look into.
Well, no, I mean, I've seen it over the years, because I've been to so many of these meetings, and it comes up among people who haven't had a whole lot of experience with town finances, and it's an obscure rule, but it does exist, and we're not going to be able to change it because we're only little Carlisle. My other question really is, why is there this point about determine feasible uses or other options for underutilized town-owned land? Just because, is that just the Highland Point? Are there other underutilized town structures and land that I'm not aware of that somebody thinks we could rent out or develop as offices or something?
Jerry, you might comment on that.
Well, I mean, there's the cranberry bog.
And the Bog House, right?
What fun. That's
There's-
the
there's-
old,
House, right?
that's the old, let's have a cocktail lounge at the Cranberry Bog idea.
Well, the opening presentation showed one of the options to consider is, had a big pink blotch over the Conant land for high density housing. It's not really realistic because it's all wetland in there and it's adjacent to the road I live on. I'd be really unhappy to see that developed.
Well, actually,
Um,
I think that there was a proposal, maybe, I don't know, 15 years ago,
15
20
years
years
ago,
ago.
yeah.
Mhm.
Somebody has
Yeah.
to help me out
Yep.
to do affordable housing on the Conant land, so there must be some places there that it could be developed. Anyway, okay, so it's the Conant land, and thank you, that helps me a lot. That's all I had to say. I just don't want anybody to be getting away with the idea that we can pay for a police station
No,
with raising the taxes on ferns.
Jerry, comment?
looks like Peg's trying to talk, but we're not hearing her.
No, I don't see her. Peg?
Not hearing Peg and Philip.
Yeah, you might not be muted on Zoom, but might be muted on your computer, actually.
If, while they're doing that, let me just make a comment on Nancy's point. There's not